Alright guys, we've made it here to chapter 7. 3 chapters to go, and this chapter only has one ending, so I'm assuming this is all just plot. So let's jump right into chapter 7 of Blood Drive Determination. The sounds of fire trucks and patrol cars echoed through the streets. The sky was dark, the air stale, and the many strong, cold gusts of wind bore mass amounts of dust and debris. I didn't envy the reporter her job, as she seemed mere moments from being blown off. But to her credit, she persevered. Behind her, there was the black shadow of an old man.
昨夜、治安当局が発表した全国怨霊災害の続報についてです。先日より各地で多発している不可解な死亡事件は依然収束の兆しが見えません。不審死や動機不明の無差別殺人、心霊目撃件数は増える一方です。そのため各県警は対応に苦慮。なかなか公式発表を出さない警察に報道陣は苛立ちを隠せません。
The old man's shadow in the background began acting strangely, jumping in place and making various other aimless motions.
警視庁はなるべく一人にならないように必ず3名以上で安全な場所で過ごすよう、また危険ですので外出も控えるようにと呼びかけています。
昨晩より全国各地で発生している巨大な黒い柱による出現被害につきまして国土交通省は非常体制の災害対策本部および警戒本部を設置しました。各地方整備局管内の情報に基づく交通・河川の被災状況および対策状況は次の通りです。
柱の成分は専門家の分析でも解析不明の未知の鉱物の結晶のようでエンティティウォール、霊体物質と名付けられています。地震計などでも全く予測のつかない場所に突如生えてくるため多数の死傷者を出し世間を混乱に陥れています。工事用カッターの刃も通らず撤去もできない状況です。防衛庁は自衛隊の調査結果などから先日まで上空に浮かんでいた黒い球体との関連を調査しています。
新しい避難場所の情報です。避難指示の出た地域にお住まいの方は以下の情報をチェックしてください。携帯サイト、ウェブサイトでも情報を発信しております。なお、ご覧の白い地域にある体育館や学校はすでに満員です。お近くの空きのある施設へ向かってください。
っていうか、前兆も速報もなくいきなり生えてくるんだ。避難も対策もねえんだよ。運が悪きが死ぬだけだ。なんで警察はいつまでも公式発表しないんだよ。編集不祥事と取られるのが嫌なのか、それとも何か隠してるのか。
The middle-aged announcer was yelling at the top of his lungs, and in an absolute frenzy, he kicked his studio desk to the ground. A black shadow of a woman could be seen behind him.
委員長、
篠崎さん、あゆみちゃん、
篠崎さん。
Miss Yui! Oh, it's everyone who died! Is she dreaming?
生き返らせてくれてありがとう。
Yeah, she's dreaming.
だけどもっといっぱい死んじゃったね。
The room grew dark, and each of the 4 figures who stood before me slowly melted into the blackness, becoming indistinct silhouettes.
持田も中島も岸沼も
たくさん死んじゃったね。あれ、私たちも生き返ってないの？
ちゃん。
何がしたかったの？
I screamed and looked up. It was just a dream. I was at home watching TV. I scrunched myself up again, putting my face to my knees.
生き返るって信じてたのに最初からダメだった。そうよ。私は全部意味のないことをしてたんだ。私どうすればいいの？生き返るって思って生き返るって思ったから、ヨシエの家まで行って大怪我をして、お姉ちゃんまで失って帰ってきたのに。
I raised my face from my knees, eyes red and burning. Then, as if I hadn't already had enough tragedy in my life, I heard a loud crash just outside my house. It was unmistakably a car wreck, and a rather severe one at that. The car's alarm was going off, but I was trying my best to ignore it. I didn't need this right now, so I simply wasn't going to bother with it.
"次のニュースです。公益財団法人 PL 振興社の会長が失踪しました。
I'm moving around in her house. I need to get to the front door. No, I don't. Oh. The car alarm outside was still going off, and it was getting harder and harder to ignore it by the second. Whoever was ringing my doorbell was really persistent. The irregular sound brought me back to reality. I crept over to the peephole and silently looked through it to see who'd been visiting me at this hour. On the other side of the door stood a man I didn't recognize. He had short hair and he was pressing the chime frantically, as if his life depended on it. I was kind of creeped out. I moved away from the peephole. The persistent ringing continued for a bit, but then finally, thankfully, came to an abrupt halt. I slowly crept back to the peephole and took another look. The man was still there. He was just pacing back and forth in place in front of a house that, for all he knew, had no occupants. Oh, Jesus. After another short while, he approached the door again and immediately put his eye right up to the outside of the peephole. The man moved his head away, but quickly replaced it with his finger, which he swirled around and around inside the tight space, as if trying to reach my eye or poke it out. He then stepped away from the door. I could have taken this opportunity to slowly move away from the peephole, but I was oddly transfixed. Of course, the second I thought that, he came back to the door yet again. And yet again, he skipped the doorbell and went straight for the peephole. Yeah, that guy's creepy. I grabbed the doorknob and was moments away from following through with that plan, when suddenly...
Ayumi, 幸子。
ダメ、開けちゃ。そいつ死者だ。
幸子。
I slowly turned to look at her.
涅槃は死んだ人の世界。死後の世界がこっちに来る。
Then there was an oddly familiar sound. Another car accident, again right outside my door. This time I looked outside through the peephole and saw the man from earlier sandwiched between a car and the wall of one of the houses across the street. He was absolutely mangled. But after only a few moments, the man's corpse disappeared, leaving nothing but a shadow in its place on the wall and the ground alike, a black stain.
何なの？世の中どうなってるの？
Not that I even really had to ask.
私が涅槃の壁を壊したから。
I wasn't just asking myself. I was asking Sachiko, whose presence still remained just behind my back. But she just looked up at me with sad eyes.
今の人も死者真っ黒になって。
No, it couldn't be. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and forced myself to remain calm enough to access the photo, but then just stopped and stared. The photo displayed on my phone, which was now on the floor, no longer had just my friends from before with blacked out faces, but Mochida, Nakashima, and Kishinuma as well. No! No way. They didn't really die, did they? That'd suck if they just killed them off. I pounded the floor with both hands and shuddered violently.
悔い改めよ。世界は終わりに近づいている。神は不浄なる不心得者を決してお許しにはならぬ。
Some cultist group was speaking on TV. I guess the news must have ended at some point when I wasn't paying attention.
世界の終わり。
This time, I was just plain talking to myself.
そう、終わりよ。まさか、ヤゴウラの最後の生き残りが自爆覚悟でこんなこと考えてるなんてね。
Magari appeared in the hallway. I had no idea how long she'd been there, nor how she'd gotten in. I noticed she still had her heels on, though.
あなた。
I stood up, and Sachiko was, as always, waiting in the wings behind me.
幸せの石で帰ってこれたわ。金付き堂の階段から吹き抜けを落ちてる間にね。まあ天神症が壊れたからこの石は使えないけど。
To demonstrate, Magari snapped the two together.
涅槃よ、死人を迎えよ。ほらね。
I probably flinched, but she was right. Nothing happened.
世界はもう数刻のうちに混沌に包まれて死の世界になる。あっけないでしょ。まさにこの世の終わりってやつ。ちなみにあれ、私の教団。アレンジでしょ。我ながら引くわ。
She pulled back her chin and flashed me a strange smile.
ああ、そういえばあなたの親もイカれて入信してたわよ。
This day couldn't have been much worse for me.
あなたこのままでいいわけ？
Magari wasn't mincing words, it seemed. I held my head in both hands and looked down at the ground.
責任を感じてるならちょっと顔貸しなさい。あんたの血に話がある。
Magari approached me and grabbed my arm. Sachiko, still right behind me, began to growl like a guard dog.
話してよ。どうせ私なんか友達も救えない。何もできない。篠崎の血だか知らないけど、私にできることなんて何もないよ。大体涅槃をこの世に出したのは吉江さんが最初にやったことじゃない。
I screamed as loudly and as fiercely as I could.
私悪くないじゃない。
I closed my eyes and cried the hardest I've ever cried, sobbing so intensely that I found myself nearly hyperventilating. Magari slapped me down to the ground.
ムカつく女ね。あなた等身大すぎるわ。少しは格好つけようとなさいよ。
I held my cheek and continued sobbing. Magari was looking down on me with contempt in her eyes, but also a certain intensity that seemed more akin to desperation than anything.
篠崎あゆみ、真実を一つ教えるわ。7番目の柱、知識のセフィラの軌道を止められなかった時点でもう世界の終わりは動かない。だけど
Magari closed in on me as if our lips were about to touch. Sachiko growled again, but Magari was clearly not intimidated in the slightest.
ブック・オブ・シャドウズはまだ失われていない。あの本を手にした篠崎の血を引くあなたならミストとまだ戦えるかもしれないわ。
I was still hesitating, and Magari apparently didn't much like it.
ふざけやがって。
Suddenly, Magari was pulling up the top of my uniform. My plump white stomach was now fully exposed.
クソったれの本はここにあるわ。
She pointed to a spot just below my belly button. As she did so, my stomach started growling with an unearthly roar and shifted in place slightly. It was almost like there was a snake slithering around inside of me.
まったく、もっと早く気づけばよかったわ。篠崎義恵の家の地下で力を使ってからそこに潜り込んで眠ってやがったのよ、そいつは。
Magari crossed her arms and snorted.
ただしあくまで入れ物で中身は空っぽだけどね。生意気にうなってやんの。
The growl that came from within my own body sounded like that of a wild beast.
まさか本当に。
ほんとすっかり騙されたわ。私は本来教団からあなたがあの空間でブック・オブ・シャドウズを手に入れるためのサポート役、それとその他雑用のために派遣されていたのよ。
そうなの。
って言っても手に入れた瞬間奪い取るつもりだったけどね。まあそれも今となってはどうでもいいわ。世界が壊れるのなら教団の継承権もクソもないし。ただね、ムカつくのよ。ミストよ、ミスト。あれで勝ったつもりでいるなんて笑っちゃうわよね。そんなあいつを思いっきりなぶり殺してやりたいでしょ。あなたも甘ったれずにできることに目を向けなさい。可能性を放棄するのは死んだ後でいい。
My eyes begin to well up yet again.
私にまだ何かできることがあるの。
Magari's expression turned deathly serious.
なんとしてもブック・オブ・シャドウズを体の外に出して支配なさい。本があなたの覚悟を認めれば自然と出てくるわ。そして本の力があればミストのいる涅槃にもう一度乗り込む道も示されるでしょうよ。
I could only stare incredulously at my abdomen. Magari took this opportunity to open my front door, again to illustrate her point. Outside, the weather was still completely anomalous, with hurricane-like winds and debris clouds everywhere. The clouds up above, too, were moving abnormally fast through a disconcerting blood-red sky. Every few seconds, a sound not unlike a spark plug firing could be heard echoing from the distance as another black flame ignited and burned itself out in some random spot.
どの道あなたも世界と共に滅びて死ぬわ。だったら見せてみなさい。その前にあなたの覚悟を。黒魔術から生まれたその本は残酷と血を好むわ。
With those parting words, Magari disappeared into the city. The sounds of her heels clacking softer and softer until they were no longer audible at all. Sachiko and I could do nothing but see her off. The entire nation was now plagued with entity walls and black silhouette-like spirits of the dead. The entity walls were rapidly destroying schools, downtown bypasses, and other crucial traffic cornerstones, and even rescue shelters, creating countless new casualties by the minute. People were running in the streets, panicked and confused, and almost certainly not much longer for this earth.
いいから走れ！潰される！海も空も動いてないよ！
Meanwhile, in Miss Kwan's office, the black-suited agents watched in horror as each TV monitor displayed a feed from a different news network across the world, and the story was exactly the same on all of them.
会長、私たちはどうすればよいのですか？
Okay. Well, the only room I can go into, apparently. Oh, I'm in my sister's. Oh, I see a dagger. I see a candle. Okay. It's weird to be able to save. The smell coming from outside is a mixture of burning metal and blood, almost certainly from a car accident. There are numerous books on the shelves relating to magic and the occult. Hino has quite the collection. There's a celestial globe on the table, one of Hinoe's favorite possessions. Oh, it's all scuffed up here. That must be from when I dropped it as a kid. I remember when that happened. Sis was just worried whether or not I was okay. She didn't say a thing about me damaging the globe. Okay, I have to go to this dagger. In front of the mirrored dresser that sat Hinoe's zodiac dagger. I gripped it in terror, closed my eyes, and started shaking.
なんとしてもブックオブシャドウズを体の外に出して支配なさい。
Oh no. She gonna cut it out of her stomach?
黒魔術から生まれたその本は残酷と血を好むわ。
No, she is. She's gonna stab herself in her stomach. I couldn't back down now. I lifted the dagger in front of me, poised to plunge it into my body and carve myself open, as samurai once did in a ritualistic suicide called seppuku. But I couldn't go through with it. I was too scared of death, too scared of the pain. The face that reflected back at me in the mirror was twisted with fear. I didn't even recognize myself. But I could see in those eyes all the weight that had been put on my shoulders, all the responsibility I had been forced to bear. My mind was made up. I lifted the dagger again, only to bring it halfway to its destination before halting its descent once more. No matter how determined I was, no matter how strong my conviction, this was literally suicide. I knew what had to be done, but knowing and accepting are two different things. I began crying like a baby. This was the most afraid I'd ever been in my entire life, and almost certainly the most afraid I ever would be. At this point, the only way I'd be able to go through with it was to clear my mind and let my arms make the motions automatically, and before I knew it, that's exactly what I did. Oh! It's most likely because I wasn't thinking about it, or anything else, for that matter. The dagger found absolutely no resistance. It was like applying excess force to a slice of cake. For a very brief moment, I felt nothing, but then the convulsions started, first my abdomen, then quickly spreading up the rest of my body. My abdomen was now spasming and constricting involuntarily, and the rest of me wasn't faring much better. My entire body was in total chaos. The extent of the agony I'd felt at that moment was absolutely impossible to convey. It was all-encompassing. I was utterly incapable of focusing on anything else. My lower body was spewing bright red blood, thick black blood, and unknown yellow substance, all of which were blending together into a slurry that was, at its core, my life essence. No! Ayumi, no! This went far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. The sheer shock of it rendered my body a jumble that I simply could not untangle. I knew there was a reason I'd done this to myself, something I absolutely had to do, and it was crucial, but regaining enough cognitive function to do it would be a challenge. She just sliced her stomach open. Holy crap. My head was swimming as I tried, beyond all reasonable measure, to hang on to consciousness just long enough to complete the task at hand. I could still see my face in the mirror, but only just, as blood that had been spurting from my abdomen had largely glazed it over. It was a truly frightful sight, comparable to, if not more, disturbing than anything I'd seen in Heavenly Host. I felt feeble, helpless, and the face in the mirror was smiling at me for it, darkly, obscenely.
お前には無理だ。
Jet black crows flew by outside the window, and in that moment a fire sparked within me. Feeling oddly resolute, I gripped the dagger jutting out from my abdomen. And yanked it to the side with every last bit of strength I had left in me. The spray of blood gushing out of me became almost exponentially more violent. Most surprisingly, it seemed like equal amounts of blood were rushing to my brain as well, and the effect was a feeling like the blood vessels in my head were on the verge of bursting. But just as I felt like I was moments from my final blackout, I saw something. There, among my own entrails on the ground, was a blood-drenched tome. It was the Book of Shadows, without question. My vision blurred from the intense loss of blood and even more intense pain. I fell forward, unable to maintain any semblance of balance any longer. And I landed right on it. With a loud, warm, and unpleasant splash, my face planted firmly into the book, which was seemingly under the odd temperature differentials of my viscera. I awoke with a start. I was still in Hinoue's room. Instinctively and frantically, I looked down at my abdomen. There, I saw a scar resembling the ones I'd almost died from during the blowback at Yoshi Shinozaki's house, runic lettering and all, but that was it. The bleeding had stopped. In fact, there was no blood anywhere in the room, and on the floor in front of me sat the Book of Shadows, not a copy, but the original. I slowly touched it, and from behind me, Sachiko spoke.
本が歩みを持ち主と認めたの。
She was staring at me with a docile, almost reverent look in her eyes. I picked up the book and looked at it, fear and awe running through my now clear head. It grumbled a bit, darting its eyes back and forth. Eventually, it seemed to settle on a specific direction, locking its gaze. It seemed to be looking out the window.
きっと涅槃の入り口。
あの方向、如月学園だわ。帰ってきてたの？もうお父さん。
世界はもう終わりました。
世界はもう終わりました。
お父さん、お母さん。
Oh, I can move. This can't end well.
世界はもう終わりました。
Numerous unsettling shadowy figures are silhouetted on the sliding screen, separating the living room from the outside. Going on now would be a terrible idea.
世界はもう終わりました。
Dad and Mom both just repeat the same line over and over again, like a broken tape recorder.
お父さん、お母さん。きっと私帰ってくるからね。
What? Wow, that was a good movie. That was a good. I'm assuming that's the halfway point movie. That was pretty good.
幸子、不思議な気持ちだけど、あなたがこうして味方でいてくれると心強いよ。
Sachiko looked at me with sweet, innocent eyes. Well, I mean, you did save her. I mean, this could be the good Sachiko, and she is from your blood. When I arrived at Kisaragi Academy, I got a much better look at the phenomenon. It was like a whirlpool with a red, dully shining hole in its center. Was this the entrance to the ever after?
あの先に涅槃が。動的魔法？魔女みたいに空を飛ぶの？嘘だ。
I closed my eyes, clasped the Book of Shadows tightly in both hands, and prayed.
Book of Shadows, 力を貸して。
When I opened my eyes again and looked up into the sky, my body began to float. I was in control of the Book of Shadows. I was a legitimate practitioner of magic now. This moment felt almost like an awakening to endless new possibilities.
これ本当に飛んでる。すごい。
And right next to me, flying by my side, was Sachiko.
Ayumi.
The momentary loss of focus dropped me out of my trance, and I immediately began falling. I gripped the book even tighter and concentrated harder than before, and sure enough, I began rising up toward the vortex once more.
Ayumi, 気をつけて。あなたが力を使えるのはその本のおかげ。絶対離しちゃダメ。
わかったわ。
As I flew higher, I could see Magari sitting on the roof of the school. That's a cool pic. So Magari turned out to be okay when we thought she was just crazy. And I never trust Masudo. Screw that guy. He needs to die.
ブックオブシャドウスを従えたようね。見直したわ、篠崎あゆみ。それにしても如月学園の真上に涅槃へのエスカレーターがあるなんてね。ついでにもう一つ教えてやるとね、涅槃がこの世界に侵食してつながってしまったのは別にあなただけのせいじゃない。涅槃天神症がこの世に発生してしまった時点で、いいえ、もっと以前にブックオブシャドウズが生み出されてしまった時に、いつかこの時が来ることは決まっていた。
I looked into Magari's face. She was being completely sincere.
その本の元の所有者も篠崎義恵もみんなそれを食い止めようと、あるいは遅らせようと必死だったの。それが次世代へつなぐだけの運命であってもね。そうやって代々受け継いできたのよ。そうだったの。だから言ってみれば、あなたがいようといまいといずれこうなったわ。ただあなたの行為はあの狂信者集団ヤゴウラ教会の生き残りミストに涅槃のパワーを与えてしまった。その責任は取らなきゃいけないわ。責任。あなたには本物のブックオブシャドウズがある。天神症で分散していた涅槃の力はミストの持つ偽物に取り込まれてしまった。でもそれを取り戻してその本に封印すれば、あんなもの簡単に吹っ飛ばせるわ。そして涅槃のコアをも迎え入れられたなら、その本は完璧なものとなる。さあ反撃よ。食らわしてやりなさい。世界が終わる前に一発ぐらい本物の実力ってやつをね。私は見ているわ。
Magari grew smaller as I climbed higher and higher, and as I looked up, I could see the threshold looming even larger, poised as if to warp itself around me.
Ayumi? 怖い？死ぬの怖い？
怖いかな。
I smiled at her, and to my surprise, it was a genuine smile. Somehow or another, I was feeling very calm. Sachiko looked at me with wide eyes.
どうしたの？
She turned away briefly, then looked over at me once more. It almost seemed like in that brief moment, she changed expressions in much the way someone would change a suit.
Ayumi? 怖いのはサチと涅槃のコアにいる人。気をつけて。
涅槃のコアにいる人？ それはミストじゃなくて。
うん、別にいる。
I looked back up to find myself practically right on top of the hole in the sky that stood in front of the abnormally huge red moon. And with my conviction settled, I jumped in. The harsh flash, the nausea, and the wrenching tightness in my chest caused me to lose consciousness for a second. But then I awoke to find that heaven and earth had switched places. It looked as though I was falling headfirst into a massive storm, with flashing lightning and roaring thunder. It almost seemed like I was previewing what the world would look like after its destruction. In the sky there was an enormous face of a doll, and the walls around me were all made of flesh. I clenched the Book of Shadows with both hands as I slowly made my landing in this new version of the Nirvana. It was a mountain of rubble.
Nani kore? 完全に壊れてる。いったー。何よもう。
あゆみ、大丈夫？
平気だよ。これくらい。
I slowly, carefully found my footing and pulled myself back up to my feet. Now, oh, I see a body right there. Now, I think maybe the school's been destroyed because he's looking for the core. That's what I'm thinking. And he's just destroying it left and right, looking for it. This was an entirely different heavenly host. It bore almost no resemblance whatsoever to any version of the school we traversed previously.
天神小学校がこんな姿に。みんなは町田くん、中島さん、岸沼くん、クオン先生、愛子さん。
Aiko's dead. I called out to my friends, but received no answer. All I could hear was the rumbling and twisting of the air around me. I can actually move. Oh, I see a fresh corpse over there. Is that Aiko? Crushed by a piece of the school. There was no mistaking it. In the midst of the wreckage, pieces of clothing from Kishinuma, Mochida, Nakashima, Miss Kwan, and Aiko were clearly visible. And the unfortunate souls who were wearing this clothing were all buried under fallen beams and other debris and surrounded by a veritable sea of blood. No! I knelt down and began sobbing uncontrollably. Sachiko stared at me as I continued to scream and cry. I really hope that's not really them. Although looking at it, I can see Miss Kwan's hair, I can see Satoshi's hair, and I can see Kishinuma's arm. I really hope they're not really dead.
Ayumi? 幸子頑張ってみる。天神小学校の運命だったらちょっとなら戻せるかもしれない。
Sachiko produced a calavera necklace from her pocket. The skeletal figure on the chain made a slight hollow clink sound as it was handled, very much as actual bone would. It looked handmade and seemed oddly warm, like a keepsake. Oh, why does Sachiko look so cute here? And not freaking evil and devilish like from the first game. Is she actually on my side? I hope she is.
それは
I had this weird feeling that I'd seen this object somewhere before.
どこかで見たことあるような思い出せない
Though she was looking down at the ground a bit, slightly guilty and slightly guarded, Sachiko giggled slightly.
これ幸子の宝物
A big smile crept across her lips, and for a moment she looked every bit the part of an ordinary little girl. I was confused. Sachiko placed her hand on the Book of Shadows. And the book spoke.
同じ日を繰り返せ
Followed by Sachiko. Suddenly, I was in Yoshi Shinozaki's clinic. The very same clinic Nakashima and I visited on that fateful day.
この人はヨシエさん
I was viewing Sachiko's memory of an event from long ago. Yoshi was writing something in her journal.
アナグラムの解析を進めると、この本に書かれている術はすべて実体の伴わない理論でしかなかった。成功例に関する文献も全く存在しない。私はなんと愚かなことをしてしまったのだろう。最初から成功しないものに心血を注いでいたなんて。本の中身である涅槃が飛び出し、異空間を作ってしまうだけの失敗作の術。しかもそこに囚われた死者は生きていた証、存在の痕跡すらも消されてしまう。
Sachiko came into the room from the back. Her eyes met with Yoshi's, and she smiled.
だが、飛び出した涅槃を抑え込むことができたため。
Sachiko stood obediently by her mother, wearing the white dress we'd seen on her in Heavenly Host. Yoshi patted her head approvingly. Sachiko then coughed up a fine black mist, but sucked it back into her mouth like a carp.
失われ、黒く消えたあの人の存在だけは取り戻せたのだ。
The face on the image was blacked out, like those of Seiko and the others. However, to my surprise, the black marking was slowly peeling itself away, revealing the features underneath. My vision slowly cleared, and when it did, amidst all the rumbling and shaking, I found myself back in Heavenly Host Elementary. Did I just time travel? Did I just go back a day? Sachiko, no! Then promptly Sachiko collapsed to the ground. Without thinking, I picked her up and held her limp, light body in my arms. She must have used up her spirit energy. She was clearly drained. She was breathing, but only very lightly. Sachiko was real. She had to have been, or I wouldn't have been able to hold onto her like this. She seemed injured, but not in any traditional manner. There were cracks running through her body, each one emanating an unearthly blue, almost gaseous light. Meanwhile, the skull itself was also cracking and breaking all around me, making an incredible noise. The roof above began to crumble away, providing glimpses of the real world. And incredibly, the entity walls hadn't spawned there yet.
戻ってる。まだみんなが死ぬ前だわ。タツコ、しっかりして。
はい、ごめん。幸子。あんまり時間戻せなかった。
幸子、ありがとう。偉いね。頑張ったね。
I could hardly believe it. I just complimented Sachiko, of all people, on a job well done.
褒めてくれるの？
Her newly formed physical body was rapidly beginning to evaporate into mist. My voice was trembling, though I suspect it was less with fear and more with confusion.
すごいわ。あなたはいい子よ。
She looked up into the sky, eyes beginning to well with tears. She was struggling to speak. Soon, she wouldn't be able to at all.
幸子、謝りたかった。
She barely had any voice left, but was persevering nonetheless. This was clearly something she didn't want to leave unsaid, no matter what.
許してもらえないのは分かってる。けど、謝りたかった。
And with that, she began full-on crying.
幸子。
I couldn't help doing the same.
たくさんの人を殺しちゃった。幸子、いい子じゃない。褒められちゃいけない子。
The tears were streaming down my face now. Sachiko's voice was so mournful, so genuine.
ケルバーなど、今たくさんの人を救ったわ。ありがとう。
A massive earthquake shook the ground. Sachiko looked scared, so I patted her head and hugged her tightly. She then looked at me squarely in the eye, gripping her calavera necklace tightly in her hand as if it were a rosary.
不思議だよ。正しいって分かったら成仏するの怖くない？
幸子。
Sachiko and the blue light alike both disappeared completely. She was gone. The being I was hugging just moments ago no longer existed. All I could do was clench my fists and mourn. The look on Sachiko's face when she asked if I was scared of dying kept flashing through my head. I kept my head hung low for a moment, then stood up and wiped the tears from my eyes. Accompanying the sound of rumbling, one single entity wall now stood in the real world. The cycle was beginning anew.
見守っていて、幸子。篠崎の末裔の私を。
Where's the book?
埋める。いいわ。最後。
God, why is she so creepy? Ugh. Wow, that was such a good chapter! Determination. Wow, that was such a good episode. Oh, and even had it like a, intro in the middle of it. That was pretty good. I like that. That was so good. We're getting to the climax of the story. EX Chapter 5. Threading the needle. So, Let's just see how many endings are in the next chapter. I'm curious, because there was no wrong ends there, but I have a feeling the next chapter is gonna have like 5 or more. No, another one. Okay, I'm assuming we're just doing story now, and probably chapter 9 and chapter 10 are the finale chapters. So, oh, I don't know. Chapter 4 had the most. That's I don't know. I don't know what to say. I feel like there's I love the story. It's great. But if we're ramping up to the finale, I kind of want to see a chapter with a lot of wrong ends, like the finale chapter of the first game, where so many things can go wrong. I wonder if they toned it down a bit in this game. So we'll make our way into the next chapter.